Video, I refer students to the usability.gov website. I use it as a required reading to teach students a couple different things. Sometimes the basics of user experience, which you can see me kind of just do a real quick, like, hey, here's a page of information that you can, and teaching principles you can use. But also, and I actually started with visual design using this resource, but I focus, this video will be about the visual design page. So on usability.gov, it's not too terrible to get students to it, which is awesome, but there are also some really meaningful resources. So if nothing else, it's a really nice list of vocabulary that you can test students on, that is tangible, that can help you pull things apart. Now, if you've looked at any videos from me on rhetoric or visual design, or the technological aspect in visual design, or even aesthetics in visual design, they should be floating around on YouTube somewhere. Then you'll know that I make a distinction I think that's important. I think when we talk about visual design, we want to think about visual design's function, the rhetorical purpose behind it, because a visual design can have multiple functions. A writer or a creator of a text can make a visual design choice for an aesthetic reason, for a rhetorical reason, and for a technological reason. So when we go to look at things like that on the web, sometimes everything's kind of mashed together, and visual design becomes only something that makes things look prettier, and then people who aren't that into creativity or art, or just about the facts, don't see the purpose in making some of these choices. And other times it is, visual design is so embedded in things like marketing and selling that people almost push away from it for a different reason. And then sometimes visual design is couched in this highly technical computer science frame that sometimes people who aren't as technically skilled with different programming systems or whatever it is, or design systems, that they sometimes can get scared. So with visual design, we want to think about what's the purpose for it. And sometimes we make one choice for one purpose or three purposes. Rhetorically, we might make a visual design choice based on a writer or a creator's purpose. What am I trying to do? How am I using visual design to draw focus to a particular thing that I want emphasized? When I use things like color palette, or when I use things like hierarchy or scale or dominance to make something seem more important when I'm designing my text or whatever, that's a rhetorical choice, because I want them to notice this thing. Now, there are also a lot of visual design focuses that, if you see even here, visual design focuses on the aesthetics of a site and its related materials. One part of visual design focuses on aesthetics. That is the way of looking at the world as beautiful or ugly. And really, it's a more creatively oriented thing. For those in my class who know the 8 aspects, I name one of the 8 aspects the aesthetic aspect, linked to creativity and linked to some of those more emotive styles of writing and design. So if you are into art and or design or marketing, maybe you've heard of aesthetics from this standpoint, where I'm designing a text to look pretty, to look interesting, to be engaging, to be visually stimulating. That would be an aesthetic motivation for visual design. And then finally, the third is a technological motivation for visual design based on my 8 aspects. And so that would be one that focuses on I'm designing it this way for cognitive uptake, which is a fancy way of saying my brain wants to upload information from what I'm looking at quickly. And so this works whether we're talking about prose and using an indent, which counts as white space, or in lines, where we're using those paragraphs to encapsulate units of content, to using things like color palette to not only emphasize, to draw focus, but to help a reader get to the information faster without necessarily dealing with all of the words at once. And so visual design could have these 3 functions: rhetorical, aesthetic, or technological. As we look at some of those components, you could learn about these components in a variety of environments. Again, like I said, you could learn about it in a rhetoric class. You could learn about it in an art class. You could learn about it in some sort of technology class, or like one of those, in a PowerPoint class, where you're just saying, how do I make things look a certain way? way? How do I use bullet points with this particular technology? So it can show up in a lot of different contexts. So, you know, if you're a student and you're trying to run through this, read through it. Think about, use this as a lens of analysis in your class. If you're a teacher, give this to your class, give them an image, give them a PSA, give them an advertisement, show them things like this around your house. I do a learning community with chemistry and writing, and one thing they get to do is household chemicals, and they kind of go on this chemical journey where they look at not just the chemical compounds that are in their homes and looking at the ingredients list and everything and the safety of it. They also look at what's the visual design and what does that say about the company, and how do I look at line or contrast or dominance, where Lysol's huge, or this big red thing that says 45% more, or just overall just stall, like, does this make it fun? We can look at all these sorts of things around our home. I'm trying to decide if I want to grab any other products, but try and find something to apply these to, and you'll start seeing it. I think one of my favorites, for instance, with line was a Dunkin' Donuts cup that had, it just had the words Dunkin' Donuts, but they were kind of curved around the cup at an angle, and it was hard. The line was the lack or the invisible thing. And so sometimes with line and shape or something like that, the absence of something is just as tangible as its presence. Just like in music, if you've got a crazy cool beat, hitting all the 8th and 16th notes in there, and then all of a sudden you have a pause or a rest, that creates this interest, or this that it really draws attention. So sometimes absence is presence. So as you look through these, texture, topography, form, unity, gestalt, space, hierarchy, all these fun things, these can become really meaningful ways to analyze a text. I think sometimes when we teach things like rhetorical analysis, we give students texts like these, but we don't give them anything more than ethos, pathos, logos as teachers. And so we want to give writers a larger toolbox, a more advanced toolbox, and this is one of them. And at this point, I've made this video go way longer than it really needs to. It's really just introducing you to the fact that there is a whole resource on things like line, shape, white space, texture, all this, and it's a meaningful classroom practice, and it's a meaningful practice for writers and rhetoricians and people doing rhetorical analysis. So dig in, have students use the language. If you're a student, use the language of this toolbox so that you have that credibility as a writer, and you're not just trying to describe, the bright blue makes it stand out. Well, if you say, the color palette enhances the design and draws the reader into the gestalt of the whole product, that changes the level of engagement that you're going to have with your reader, and the level of credibility and knowledge that you're going to exude in your writing. Okay. Also, use these principles in essays. I tell my students all the time, include images in essays, include visual design elements in essays. There are ways to do it in all of the citation styles. APA says how to do tables and figures. Let's use some figures. Let's use some images. Let's use screenshots. Insert a meme for fun or to add to the rhetorical content. Just know that it doesn't trade for word count or page count. Don't get yourself in trouble. Okay? But it's the kind of writing people do on a daily basis in everyday life, professionally and personally, right? We post GIFs, we post memes, we use emojis. We want people to know how to communicate in that printed form, even if it's a digital form.